Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
Have you ever tried tiramisu?
Yes,
I
actually.
feel like I have too, but I can't really put a. I was gonna say face, but I can't really put a taste to it now that I'm thinking about it.
It's like coffee flavor
Is it? Oh,
and
I'd
cake.
probably really like it then.
This is not at all where I was expecting this conversation to start.
No, I wasn't either, but I just remember tiramisu, and I'm like, interesting.
All of my friends from university loved tiramisu, so I had it like all the time there. And I was like, oh yeah, I've had this before. It's kind of like coffee cake.
Kind of like coffee cake. Okay, shit. Maybe I'll pick up some tiramisu on the ride home, and
And why are we talking about tiramisu?
because it's Sleepless in Seattle time.
Yes.
Pew 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 pew. Air
Happy
horns.
Valentine's Day. Happy early Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day, Blake.
Technically, happy Groundhog Day to you.
It is indeed February 2nd when we were filming this. I did see that and thought that was pretty funny. I remember last year we made the joke that like every Groundhog Day we should just re-release our Groundhog Day episode. Like
No, I
nothing
think we should
happened.
re-record it every year and just like talk about it like we've never talked about it before.
Yeah, or just like 10 years later, like anything new to say about Groundhog Day? No. Well, tough shit. We have to fill 2 hours. Ay, ay, ay.
This is not that episode and not the movie we're talking about. We're talking about Sleepless in Seattle, the romantic comedy from 1993, one of the biggest movies of that year. A movie that I've been recommended a few times because it's Meg Ryan's like one of her all-timers, and the director writer Nora Ephron, also such a big name in film history. So
Yeah, yeah. I have to confess, I kind of went into this knowing nothing. So for those of you regular listeners, hi Nick. Like we were talking about, well, it's Valentine's Day, so we should do like a romantic comedy, and we just kind of thought I was the one who was just like, oh, it's Sleepless in Seattle, let's do that, right?
yep.
And that's kind of all I really knew about this movie going in was it's a romantic comedy. It stars Tom Hanks. It stars Meg Ryan, and it presumably is set in Seattle, right? That's kind of all I knew. So actually, I was pleasantly and occasionally not so pleasantly surprised by this movie.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I landed as well. Like I knew very little about this one as well going in, and I kind of read the basic premise before I fully committed to this one. But Jess has been trying to get me to watch this one for a few years now. She really likes this one. She really likes Meg Ryan as well. So
I have to admit, she is like, I think my only real point of contact with Meg Ryan was Anastasia, the animated movie. But
I didn't even know she was the voice actor.
she
in that.
was Anastasia. She played a Russian woman with no
Wow.
Russian accent. But but yeah, no, yeah,
You still haven't seen when Harry Met Sally yet?
still haven't seen it.
Oh, that's an all-timer for me.
Yeah, I guess apparently one thing I'm learning about myself is that I have a real 90s rom-com void in my oeuvre. So,
Well, that's 80s actually.
oh, is
Pretty
it?
sure. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
pretty sure it's like 89. It's a Rob Reiner classic. So
Okay.
Rob Reiner, low key one of my favorite directors of the 80s. So it's fun when he shows up randomly in movies like this too.
Yeah, and he's very distinct looking as well, right? You're
Yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah.
that's fucking Rob Reiner. Who else would that be?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right, so shall we talk about the plot, spoiler free?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Michael, are you ready with the synopsis? Yes, Michael, I am. So, we open to a funeral, and Tom Hanks and his son Jonah are burying their wife and mother, who is the same person. I I don't really like how I phrased that, but I'm not redoing it. So, anyways, yeah, so he is a widower. He's quite upset about it. Meanwhile, Meg Ryan's character is recently engaged to a very sweaty and very neurotic Bill Pullman, and everybody's really, really happy about this, except maybe Meg Ryan. There might be some slight trouble in paradise, which is revealed when Jonah, the 8-year-old, he essentially calls Frasier, like a
Yeah.
like a pop psychology radio show. So this 8-year-old calls in to say that his dad needs a new wife because he's sad. And Tom Hanks kind of gets like pulled into the conversation, and he ends up kind of venting his feelings to hundreds of thousands of listeners about how much he loved his wife and blah, 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 blah. This kind of goes viral before going viral was a thing, where suddenly
Yeah.
like thousands of single women are like calling in, requesting his phone number and simping for this guy. That's right, people. I know the modern lingo. So anyways, what's her name? Meg Ryan happens to also hear this broadcast, and when she hears Tom Hanks talking about how much he loved his wife, and then she also hears her mother talking about how magical it was when she met her father, she starts realizing that maybe she does love Bill Pullman, but maybe she doesn't love him as much as she thinks she does.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it's kind of this sort of like parallel narrative of like Tom Hanks kind of opening up to the idea of dating again, and Meg Ryan developing a weird fixation on this man she's never met. Yeah. So, anyways, that's the plot.
I think out of all of that, I think you crushed it with like the spoiler-free plot. But characters and people you may know, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan are the face of this movie, right? Like literally, they're the two people on the poster. It's funny that you used their names exclusively when talking about them, because there are movies where people disappear into a role, and we've talked about it before, and I can't think of what movie in particular as an example, but there are movies where you use the character's name when you're talking about them. This is a movie where Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan are like so front-facing in this movie that it's almost hard to remember their character names at times.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm actually looking at the poster right now. It's an iconic poster. You've got
It is.
Tom Hanks framed to the left, Meg Ryan framed to the right, and they're both kind of gazing off into the distance unwittingly at each other, and like Tom Hanks's half is framed during the daytime and Meg Ryan's half is framed at night, and bing bang boom, that's the poster, baby.
Yeah, I think it's just a really, really iconic poster that kind of explains the movie essentially.
Sam Baldwin. That's Tom
Yes.
Hanks'. I'm actually Googling it. I was Googling it while you were talking. And Annie Reed is Meg Ryan, but nobody's going to remember that.
No, I think that's just something to note that's interesting about this movie, is it's more of these are two actors doing performances that you're just going to remember Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. You're not going to remember the characters.
It's funny. Like, I was watching this movie and I was looking at a young Tom Hanks, and I was kind of just like, this guy's been around a long time, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Like
even longer than this, like another probably 5 years earlier than this.
Maybe
at
even
least.
Yeah, maybe even more than that. But it was just, it's kind of surreal. Afterwards, I kind of looked up his filmography and I was just kind of like, oh, I guess you really are a household name, aren't you, Tom Hanks?
Oh yeah, Tom Hanks is one of. It's almost shocking that we haven't done a Tom Hanks movie yet, but he is absolutely one of the biggest American actors of his generation.
It's almost like they don't even really make him like Tom Hanks anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the man's an institution. He's
Yeah.
an institution in and of itself. I don't know. I think Meg Ryan is more known for her like rom-com roles in the 90s. I don't know what she's done recently.
80s, 90s.
Yeah, I don't know what she's done recently, but like she fully embodies her persona exceptionally well. Like she's very, very likable in this movie.
Exceptionally
Actually,
likable.
they're both exceptionally likable, and the premise might have just deflated entirely if they weren't. So
I agree. Like honestly, I would say this movie is carried by their two performances.
I actually, you know what? I'm going to save this for next week's episode, but I have a hot take about what the real heart of this movie is, but maybe I'll save that for next week.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. So Tom Hanks, I actually was shocked that he was actually 36 at the time they filmed this, because he looks like he's in his 20s at this point.
He looks younger than we do.
Yeah, he does. He legitimately does, which is
Yeah.
mind-blowing. Because I kind of, when I started watching this, I was like, God damn, how old is Tom Hanks? He's so boyish in this movie. Because there was a point in time when I was like, I don't fully believe that he's a father to this like 8-year-old kid.
It is interesting. Like there are some scenes where they seem more like brothers than like father and son, don't they?
Yeah, they really do. Jonah Baldwin, played by, oh god, I can't remember his name now. Sorry, he's not a person that you're going to remember from the last like 20 years of movies, but funny enough, he actually played TJ Detweiler in Recess for the first 2 seasons.
I have to say, like, I think I'm sometimes blind to score, and I'm also sometimes blind to acting because I'm like have other things I'm focusing on. This kid is electric.
He's really good in this.
And like, it's such a mixed bag with child actors, but like he was like holding his own with Tom Hanks in every scene he was in.
Yeah, I thought he was pretty solid too. It's funny because he actually had like a decent run as a child actor, because he does this. He does Recess for 2 seasons before his voice gets too deep. And then he also plays the bar mitzvah boy in the Seinfeld episode Serenity Now.
Well, hey, if you appeared on actually more on Seinfeld later in this movie.
Yes.
But yeah, that's pretty funny. Good for him.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. So Tom Hanks, I just want to shout out too that I just watched Asteroid City for the first time with Tom Hanks, and it was amazing. I literally watched it last night. I loved it. So it came out. It's a Wes Anderson movie, so if you're not on the Wes Anderson train, I think you're going to struggle with it, especially because I would say it turns up all the Wes Anderson-ness of a movie to like 11, but I think with this, and this is such an aside for Wes Anderson, but I think you have to start with his earlier movies and actually like follow his career if you're going to enjoy his films.
I have to say, you showed me the Royal Tenenbaums recently, and I quite enjoyed it quite a lot.
Yeah,
quite.
Exactly. So I think if you literally started your first Wes Anderson movie with Asteroid City, your mind would be like, how this doesn't work. But if you kind of get on the train and follow the stops as the timeline goes, then you'll have a good time with it.
It's kind of like David Lynch, right? Where it's like you have to like kind of ease into him. Like there's some, you can't start with Mulholland Drive. You have to like work your way up to it.
Same with like Federico, or what was his last name?
Federico Fellini.
Yeah.
8.5, right? My first ever episode on this podcast that we're doing.
Yeah, you basically handed me Asteroid City and we're like, Wes Anderson's good, right?
Yeah. Well, you kept inviting me back, so I guess it worked out.
Yeah, we need to go back to Fellini at some point, but I also want to shout out Bill Pullman as Walter, the neurotic, like you said, allergic to everything, greatest U.S. president of all time. Which
today we
I don't
fight
know if you
for our
remember
independence. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Independence Day. He's also a Lone Star in Spaceballs, which is iconic.
Yeah. Those are actually the 2 points of comparison I was going to bring up. It's actually funny. Like I was watching him in this movie and I was like, you know what? Bill Pullman has range. Like he plays a dork, like a sweaty, uncomfortable dork, surprisingly well.
But also like extraordinarily likable in the role too.
Yeah.
Like maybe too likable.
And like, oh man, I think you and I might have had the same thoughts on this fucking movie, but yeah. So, yeah.
And to round out the actors, we have Rosie O'Donnell playing Becky, Annie's best friend and coworker.
Hey, you know what? Cards on the table. Young Rosie O'Donnell is kind of cute, right?
Yeah. I think she's actually great in this movie too. I think I think every performance is good in their own right out of like the top 5 actors here.
She was great. She plays like the whole idea of like the, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the female lead's kind of plucky best friend is kind of like a tried and tested trope. But she had some great moments where I was like, yeah. I believe her. Like I would be friends with her.
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe her as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't always the case, especially with like a rom-com, right?
It's funny. Rosie O'Donnell voiced one of the gorillas in Tarzan, and like the whole time I just kept hearing the gorilla talking. That's not a dig at Rosie O'Donnell. I'm just like the whole time I was like, oh, I remember Tarzan from 1997. That was a good movie.
Nice. The only other actor I did want to shout out quickly is Rita Wilson playing Tom Hanks' sister in this movie. I kept looking at her like, why do I know this woman? And it's because it's Tom Hanks' wife.
Awkward. That is really awkward.
That's Hollywood, baby.
Yeah. Huh. You guys can't see the face I'm making right now, but like I'm really crinkling my features.
And then Nora Ephron directing, co-writing this. She also co-wrote it with 2 other guys, David S. Ward, who wrote The Sting, and Jeff Arch, who originally conceived this script. And we'll talk a little bit more about the background of the script, I think, in the deep dive, because it is kind of an interesting writing process here.
This
movie is like heavily documented about how this came to even get to the point of filming it. So
I wish more movies were like documented their making of process, because like
I
almost kind of feel like for this movie and a lot of other movies, it's like how it even got made is almost just as interesting as the movie itself, right?
It really is. So Nora Ephron, you're going to know her from the writing the screenplay of When Harry Met Sally. She also wrote and directed You've Got Mail, and then Julie and Julia. So she has a few like very famous movies from the 80s right up into the mid 2000s.
Yeah, she unfortunately passed away in like 2012, yeah?
Somewhere around there, 2011, 2012, yeah.
Oh, it's too bad. Well, she certainly...
Too early, too.
Yeah, I know, right? She certainly carved out a nice little niche for herself, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. When Harry Met Sally is one of my favorite movies of all time, and that is in part due to how great of a script it is.
Yeah. I will say, this script has... I really need to come up with a term for this, but it's almost like this script has one of my favorite qualities that any work of fiction can have, and that's charm. You know what I mean? There's lots of little jokes or like little character quirks or like little personality touches here and there that I'm just like, yeah, like it's funny. I don't have a great attention span, as you well know, but actually, Blake, you know that more than anyone. But like, I was at one point I did check the runtime and I was like, has it already been 40 minutes? Oh, okay. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll say, and kind of we're getting into this, who this movie and for, and does it hold up? Like, I do think there are some pacing issues to the movie, but overall, it does fly by pretty quickly.
I had a couple qualms with this movie, but none of them had to do with pacing.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So let's get into it then. Who is this movie for, and does it hold up to a modern watch? I think so. Obviously, this is a rom-com. This is a romance film, and rom-coms can kind of go, I think.
Maybe it would be worth talking about, like, what is your, Blake, you specifically, what is your relationship with rom-coms?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, When Harry Met Sally is one of my favorite movies of all time. And that's kind of the rom-com movie. Like, that's the movie that started rom-coms, essentially. Like, really kind of tilting towards that specific genre.
Okay.
So,
there you go.
Something like that. I'm also a really, really big fan of, oh God, what's it actually? Is it Love Actually?
Is it?
I mean, is it? Oh
Is
God.
it?
No, it's Crazy Stupid Love. God damn it. It's Crazy Stupid Love. I am a massive fan of Crazy Stupid Love, which is one of the funniest movies of the 2010s, in my opinion.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
I'm
I'm on the comedy train, but all right, let's hear your side of things, though.
To be honest, surprisingly, I feel like I have a pretty big gap in that side. I actually think this might be one of the first rom-coms I've seen in a long time. Really? And maybe I'm just not remembering correctly. Like, I enjoy a good, like, romantic subplot here and there, but, like, I don't even know if I can name, like, the last romantic comedy I saw.
Oh, man. I watch Crazy Stupid Love like once every 3 to 5 years. I love that movie.
That's true.
Same with When Harry Met Sally. Jess and I watch it every year for Valentine's Day. It's our Valentine's Day movie.
Aw. Well, actually, I think, like, Casablanca is one of my favorite movies, and that's technically a love story, now that I think about it.
That's a romance. That's not a rom-com.
Yeah, I guess we need to get a little more specific in our genre definitions here. So I might have been wandering into this blinder than usual, if that makes sense.
Yep. I think with a rom-com, there's obviously two active markets for rom-com. There's a guy's rom-com and a girl's rom-com. And sometimes you can mesh in between the two, and like that's not to say a guy's rom-com can't be enjoyed by a girl and like vice versa, right? But I think that this one skews more towards the female type of a rom-com.
And yet, as a man, I still felt represented in this movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think actually that's where Tom Hanks comes in, and he actually does a lot of rewriting of his character and like changing some of the dialogue up, thinking about how this male character would interact with his environment, essentially.
He's certainly believable, if that makes sense.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
That was one of my questions that I was going to ask you in the deep dive was, do you believe that Tom Hanks is this character? Like, do you believe that he's heartbroken about his wife? Do you believe him as a father of this child? Like, do you believe in Tom Hanks? Because I think that's really, at the end of the day, if you don't believe in Tom Hanks in any of those pieces, this movie's going to fall apart pretty quickly.
Yeah, right. So, no, I believe in Tom Hanks. I have not seen him or touched him personally, but in my heart, I know that he exists somewhere out there.
Perfect. I actually think that for me, a lot of the time, it's more like Meg Ryan's performance that comes through in this movie. Like, I think Tom Hanks is great, and he holds this movie together, but I think at the end of the day, I like Meg Ryan just a little bit more.
Well, I think
in this movie,
partly that might just be by design because he's sort of like a everyman type character. You know what I mean?
And he's very cynical, and he's been through the ringer, right?
Yeah, his wife just died, so yeah.
And I think with this movie as well, like, you know, you can toe the line between like a cynical rom-com, like When Harry Met Sally. You can go like hopelessly romantic movie. I think this movie kind of tries to juggle both at times, and that might not always work for everybody.
I think, yeah, we're going to talk about this more next week, but there is a kind of, I would say the tone of this movie is quite when you get right down to it, the premise and the tone are a bit fantastical and idealized, but this movie smartly kind of plays with that a little bit.
Yes.
Like this movie
is definitely a movie that is a response to the rom-com genre, which is funny because that's also like Nora Ephron kind of created this, so it's funny that she's now kind of playing with her model of this
well, like
scenario.
there's, and we'll talk about this more next week, but there's definitely moments where like Tom Hanks almost looks into the camera and he's like, we know how ridiculous this is, but we've committed and you need to commit or get the fuck out of this theater.
Right, exactly. So does this movie hold up to a modern watch? I have mixed opinions on that. I think that there's some elements of this movie and like some plot threads of this movie that are like, yikes, a little bit, honestly.
Well, and I think we might be on the same page here. I mean, it's certainly, through no fault of its own, it's dated. I mean,
yeah,
the whole idea of like a call-in radio show where you discuss your problems on air is kind of ridiculous. Now it would be a podcast.
Absolutely. I listened to a podcast like that too. So.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay, great.
I do.
So actually, I think I've seen some too. Now that you mention it. So.
Yep. Well, and I think that there's some jokes and some references, cultural references that I don't think if you're any younger than us, like we are literally on the border of some of these references.
Yeah, and like, you know what? You and I probably only caught them because we're like film historian hobbyists, right?
Yeah, and like culturalists in a sense too.
Yeah.
So
I like that. We're culturalists. I'm going to start introducing myself as a culturalist.
It's not a bad term. I've just coined it.
There you go. Blake, you got one.
Nice.
You did it.
Part of the concept of this movie is Meg Ryan falling in love with this character that she's never met and only heard of the radio. But then she borderline stalks him as well. And so I was going to talk about this more in the deep dive, but this is a movie that, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think when you think about it a little bit more, it does become a bit of a problem, is that this movie, the roles could never be reversed in this film.
I didn't really put that together until you're just saying it, but like, yeah, no. And like, we got to talk about Meg Ryan next week because she is #problematic.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Exactly. So one scene to sell a movie, I think, in my opinion, there's one right answer and there's 7 wrong answers to the movie clip that you should watch for this one to decide whether or not you're going to be into this movie. And that's Sam is sleepless in Seattle. The first movie clip on YouTube for this, it's the movie clip where essentially Jonas, Tom Hanks' kid, calls into the radio show and explains the situation. Then Tom Hanks' character gets involved in the conversation, and all the while, Meg Ryan's character, Annie, is listening all on the other side of the country in her car.
Yeah, I had to agree because that's essentially the inciting incident for the whole movie.
Exactly. And so that's the either get on or get off point, right?
Yeah, and I have to hand it to all 3 of the main actors, Tom Hanks, the kid, and Meg Ryan, is that they do, again, for as a little bit fantastical as this premise is, and for not even being in the same state, they do like manage to sell this whole moment exceptionally well.
Exactly. So I think that is the make or breaks clip to watch, and if you're not into it, you probably don't want to watch the rest of this movie.
Yes. You heard it here first, folks.
One to watch. This is obviously a Valentine's Day movie. Like, I don't see any other time of the year that I'm checking this one out, honestly.
It's February or bust. That's it.
Yeah, it really is. Like, it's such a heavily focused rom-com film. Like, and it's funny because there's elements of other holidays in this movie. There's actually at least 2 that I can think of, but really Valentine's Day is the inciting, like the big epic conclusion of this movie ends on Valentine's Day.
Yes, and I mean, where else could it possibly end? It's like how every teenager story has to end, or every high school story has to end on prom night, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. This is a Valentine's Day movie. I think your female spouse is going to like this likely slightly more than your male spouse would, but again...
And yet, I enjoyed this movie. Like, I didn't, maybe not for the reasons other people enjoyed it, but I did enjoy this movie quite a bit.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit more mixed on it than you are, I think.
Okay, well, shit, I guess we finally have something to talk about as opposed to us just being like, yeah, it's great. Like,
Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's also me coming in with a little bit more rom-com history and having some movies that I really, really do love. So,
What I thought would be interesting about this episode is that we're kind of in very different stages in our life where like you are
yeah.
married and I am actively dating.
Yep.
So like I think that also changes the way we're approaching this kind of story.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I'm like the Rosie O'Donnell character of this movie.
Okay, and I'm Meg Ryan then.
Oh no.
Oh shit.
Oh, that's great. Where to watch right now? I watched it on Crave. I'm sure you rented it on YouTube, but it's on Crave.
So I'm dog sitting for some friends and
Yep.
turns out they do not I was not able to hack into their Crave account, so I had to rent it.
But no, it was good on Crave. I'm sure you had a similar experience on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Completely serviceable. So cool. And that is it for the primer episode, I think.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to say about this one in particular, so come back next week.
I'm looking forward to the deep dive. I think.
What would be your radio name? Like if you called into a radio station and you had to give like a fake title to describe your problem, what would it be called?
A loser in London?
Mine would just be bald and sweaty.
Oh, great. All right. Well, we'll see you next time.
Bye.